Hello, and welcome. Take a slow breath and allow yourself to settle into a place of calm. You are here not to rush, not to worry, but simply to listen as time unfolds its stories. Tonight, we will drift gently into the past, walking the quiet paths of history together. Imagine yourself resting in a tranquil room, the air soft and still. Beyond the window, centuries whisper, waiting to be heard. Together, we will journey into the world of the samurai and the Ronin, figures of loyalty, dignity, and change. Their stories are not only tales of battles and rulers, but reflections of honor, resilience, and the search for meaning in uncertain times. Let each word guide you slowly, like footsteps on a quiet garden path. With every moment, allow your thoughts to soften, your body to rest, and your mind to open to the gentle rhythm of history. Now, let us begin. Imagine yourself on the islands of Japan many centuries ago. The air is cool, often touched by the mist of the surrounding seas. Mountains rise gently into the horizon, their slopes covered with whispering forests of cedar and pine. Rivers cut through fertile plains where rice paddies shimmer like mirrors beneath the sun. This land, shaped by both serenity and storms, would give birth to one of the most distinctive warrior traditions the world has ever known, the samurai. At the heart of Japan's early history was a society bound by nature's rhythm. The people depended on the rice harvest, which required cooperation, patience, and discipline. Villages clustered near rivers and fertile valleys, while coastal communities looked to the sea for fish and trade. Over time, powerful families began to oversee these lands. They managed the farmers, ensured protection, and offered loyalty to regional rulers. From this structure, the foundation of Japan's feudal system slowly emerged. In these early centuries, Japan was not a single unified nation, but a mosaic of clans, each with its own pride and heritage. Disputes often arose, sometimes over land, sometimes over loyalty. To guard their interests, the noble families began to rely on skilled warriors, men trained not only in the art of combat, but in the discipline of service. These were the beginnings of the samurai. The word samurai itself carries the meaning of those who serve, and indeed their identity was shaped less by personal ambition and more by devotion to a master. A samurai's life was not his own. He was a guardian of his lord's land, his people, and his honor. This devotion to duty was the seed of a philosophy that would later be called Bushido, the way of the warrior. But in the earliest days, before Bushido was written down, the samurai's world was simpler. It was about loyalty, survival, and honor expressed through action rather than through words. A samurai learned to ride horses across rugged terrain, to handle the bull with precision, and to wield the sword with graceful economy. His days were filled with training, meditation, and a quiet awareness that his life was tied to forces greater than himself. Geography shaped them as much as philosophy. Japan's mountains isolated regions from one another, creating a natural environment for independent clans to flourish. The sea, though it offered protection from distant invaders, also kept Japan somewhat apart from the wider world. This balance of isolation and internal rivalry gave the samurai a unique role. They were both guardians of tradition and the agents of change when conflict demanded it. The cultural soil from which the samurai grew was also nourished by spiritual traditions. Shinto, the ancient belief in the sacredness of nature, taught reverence for mountains, rivers, and ancestral spirits. Buddhism, arriving from the mainland, offered meditative practices that calmed the mind and encouraged discipline. Confucian ideas emphasized loyalty, hierarchy, and duty. Together, these influences wove a fabric of thought that guided the samurai's sense of purpose. Picture a small wooden house in the countryside, smoke rising gently from its hearth. Outside, a samurai practices his stance beneath the falling cherry blossoms. The blossoms themselves, fragile and fleeting, came to symbolize the samurai's own life. beautiful, brief, and dedicated to a cycle larger than the self. The samurai knew, even in training, that his path was not simply about strength. It was about harmony with the world around him, about finding meaning in service, and about carrying the dignity of his lord's name. As centuries passed, the samurai became more than just fighters. They were administrators, poets, and students of philosophy. Their swords were not only weapons but symbols of their soul. The long katana, polished to a mirror's edge, represented the discipline of generations. It was said that the making of such a blade was itself a spiritual act, involving fire, water, and prayer. A samurai carried his sword as one might carry a reminder of his very being. By the end of Japan's early era, the samurai had become an essential part of the nation's identity. They were no longer just guardians for noble families. They were a class of their own, respected and feared, admired and sometimes resented. Their presence shaped politics, influenced culture, and defined the rhythm of society. And yet, within this rise lay the seeds of future transformation. For if a samurai's identity was tied entirely to his master, then what happened when that master was gone? This question would later give birth to the figure of the Ronin, the masterless samurai, whose lives would become symbols of both tragedy and resilience. For now, however, we leave them in their beginning. Imagine the gentle sound of a stream moving through a valley. Picture the soft light of the setting sun across the rice fields. The samurai stand quietly at the dawn of their story, not yet burdened by the trials of later centuries. Their journey has only begun, and the echoes of their footsteps will carry far into the future. Picture Japan as it slowly moved into a new chapter of its history. The land, still wrapped in misty mountains and deep forests, began to take on a clearer political form. Powerful families rose to prominence, their authority stretching across valleys, towns, and fields. Out of this order emerged what we might call the classical age of the samurai, a time when their role was fully established and their presence deeply woven into the fabric of society. Feudalism defined this era. Land was not just soil for planting, but the very measure of wealth and influence. Lords, known as daimyo, governed large estates, and each estate was carefully maintained by farmers who gave a portion of their harvest as tribute. The daimyo, in turn, pledged loyalty to the shogun, the supreme military leader of the nation. At every level of this structure, samurai formed the connecting thread, guardians of land and honor, sworn protectors of order. Imagine the daily rhythm of life in this age. In the countryside, farmers bent over rice paddies, their lives tied to the cycles of water and sun. Merchants traveled narrow roads lined with pine trees, carrying silk, tea, and ceramics from one province to another. Artisans worked carefully at their craft, lacquerware, pottery, and the delicate folding of paper into forms that resembled cranes or blossoms. Amid all of this, the samurai stood like tall pillars, watching over the land, ensuring loyalty and maintaining stability. But the classical age was not only about order, it was also about refinement. The samurai class became deeply engaged in culture. They practiced calligraphy with brushes that moved like flowing streams across rice paper. They recited poetry, especially the brief but powerful verses of the waka and haiku, which captured entire landscapes or emotions in a few syllables. They took part in tea ceremonies, where the quiet preparation of powdered green tea became a meditation on patience, respect, and simplicity. The sword, of course, remained at the center of their identity. By this time, the katana had achieved near mythical status. It was said to contain the soul of its owner, and to lose it was to lose one's very essence. A samurai treated his sword with reverence. He polished it daily, not merely for sharpness but as an act of devotion, much like one might tend to a shrine. This period also saw the refinement of samurai values into a clearer philosophy. Bushido, the way of the warrior, was not yet codified in books, but it was lived in daily practice. Honor, loyalty, and self-discipline became guiding principles. A samurai was expected to carry himself with dignity, to act with fairness, and to respect the balance between strength and compassion. Architecture reflected this spirit as well. Castles rose across the landscape, their tall wooden towers framed by sweeping tiled roofs. Surrounded by moats and stone walls, these castles were not only military fortresses but also cultural centers. Within their walls, daimyo hosted poets, scholars, and artists. Samurai patrolled the courtyards, stood guard at the gates, and joined in councils of strategy and governance. Religious life gave the samurai a spiritual foundation. Zen Buddhism, with its focus on meditation and clarity of mind, became particularly influential. Picture a samurai sitting quietly in a rock garden, the gravel raked into patterns resembling waves. The stillness of such moments balanced the demands of duty and the possibility of conflict. For the samurai, stillness was as important as movement, silence as meaningful as speech. Trade and exchange expanded during this time, though Japan remained cautious of outside influence. Silk and porcelain arrived from China, ideas of governance and philosophy from Korea, and occasional glimpses of faraway worlds reached its shores. Yet the samurai remained rooted in their own traditions, shaping a culture that was distinctly Japanese. In this classical age, the samurai were not merely defenders of land. They became symbols of an entire way of life. Their presence was felt in the fields, in the halls of power, in the verses of poetry, and in the quiet moments of tea and ink. They embodied a balance of strength and grace, authority and humility. But beneath this order, subtle shifts were already at work. Power struggles between clans would test loyalty. Rival daimyo would compete for influence, and the delicate harmony of society would sometimes be shaken. For now, however, imagine the steady rhythm of hooves on a mountain path, the soft flicker of lanterns in a castle corridor, and the measured strokes of a brush writing poems about the moon. This was the world of the samurai in their classical age, a world of duty, culture, and enduring presence. As Japan's seasons turned and centuries passed, the samurai stood firmly at the center of society. Yet even a land surrounded by seas cannot remain untouched by the wider world. Gentle currents of foreign influence reached the islands, carried by traders, monks, and distant travelers. These influences shaped the samurai's path in ways subtle and profound, weaving new threads into the fabric of their traditions. The first of these influences came in the form of ideas. From the Asian continent, Buddhism traveled across waters, brought by monks who carried scriptures and statues of serene figures. Imagine a samurai kneeling in a temple, the faint sound of a bronze bell echoing through wooden halls. In the soft glow of candlelight, he heard words about impermanence, compassion, and the pursuit of inner clarity. These teachings did not erase his warrior's duties, but they gave him a mirror in which to examine his soul. The discipline of meditation, the quiet stillness of gardens, and the acceptance of life's fleeting nature became central to his way of being. Confucianism, too, made its mark. This philosophy, with its careful attention to hierarchy and loyalty, strengthened the bonds between master and servant. For a samurai, loyalty to his lord was not only a social contract but a moral one. Confucian teachings emphasized that order was achieved when each person knew their place and fulfilled their role with sincerity. Thus, the samurai's devotion to duty deepened, guided by principles that connected family, society, and governance. Alongside these philosophies, the arrival of trade brought material influences. From China came silk, delicate and smooth, worn by nobles and daimyo in elegant displays of status. Porcelain, painted with serene landscapes, graced tea rooms where samurai gathered for quiet ceremonies. From Korea came techniques in metalwork and printing, each adapted and made uniquely Japanese over time. For a brief moment in history, even the West touched Japan's shores. In the 16th century, Portuguese traders arrived, their ships heavy with goods unfamiliar to the islands. Among these goods was the firearm, a weapon that forever changed the way wars were fought. Imagine a samurai, trained for years to master the bow and sword, watching the sudden burst of smoke and fire from a foreign weapon. At first, the firearm was seen as crude, lacking the elegance of the blade, yet it found its place in battle, altering strategies and forcing adaptation. Christian missionaries also came with the traders, bringing with them stories of a single God and teachings unlike the traditions of Buddhism and Shinto. For a time, some lords welcomed these new ideas, allowing churches to rise beside temples. But the influence remained fragile, and Japan would later close its gates, seeking once again to preserve its own way of life. Still, the brief presence of Christianity left echoes that mingled with the spiritual landscape. The sea itself played a role in these exchanges. Imagine the coast of Nagasaki, waves touching wooden docks as ships unloaded their cargo, the air filled with the scent of foreign spices and the chatter of many tongues. For the samurai who guarded these ports, the world beyond Japan was no longer a distant dream. It was something tangible, present, and quietly transformative. Even in the arts, foreign influence could be felt. Ink paintings inspired by Chinese traditions found new expression in Japanese hands, where landscapes became softer, more ethereal. Architecture, too, borrowed ideas yet shaped them into structures that harmonized with nature rather than dominating it. The samurai lived within this blend of old and new, guardians not only of their lords, but also of a culture that absorbed influences while keeping its own character intact. In many ways, these external currents deepened the samurai's identity rather than erasing it. Buddhism taught them stillness. Confucianism strengthened their loyalty. Trade brought new tools and treasures, and the fleeting brush of Western contact reminded them of their uniqueness. Like rivers feeding into the sea, these influences joined the larger flow of Japanese life, shaping but never overwhelming it. As evening falls over this chapter of history, imagine lanterns glowing along a castle wall. Inside, a samurai sits cross-legged in a chamber, a calligraphy brush in his hand. He writes verses inspired by Chinese poetry, meditates on Buddhist impermanence, and prepares to serve his master with Confucian devotion. Beyond the walls, merchants and sailors exchange stories of distant lands. The samurai listens, yet remains rooted, balanced between the world outside and the traditions of his homeland. The samurai were no longer only warriors of Japan. They had become custodians of a culture enriched by ideas and goods from faraway shores. And yet, these changes would only prepare them for greater challenges ahead, an age of growth, power, and responsibility that awaited just beyond the horizon. Imagine Japan entering an era of flourishing. The land was still shaped by mountains and seas, but its people had grown more connected, its rulers more ambitious, and its culture more refined. The samurai, once guardians of scattered clans, now stood at the very center of a society in motion. This was a period of growth, when technology advanced, trade expanded, and the samurai became both warriors and stewards of a blossoming world. The growth of this age began with the land itself. Rice remained the foundation of the economy, but innovations in agriculture made harvests more abundant. New irrigation systems carried water to fields more efficiently, while terraces carved into hillsides allowed farming even on steep ground. Imagine the shimmering sight of rice paddies stretching further than before, reflecting the sky like countless mirrors. Farmers labored with patience, their work supporting not only villages but entire armies and cities. For every samurai standing in armor, countless hands in the fields sustained him. Trade, too, expanded. Roads wound through valleys and across mountain passes, carrying goods between provinces. Merchants traveled with horses and wooden carts, their bells jingling as they entered towns. Markets grew lively, filled with the fragrance of dried fish, fresh vegetables, and cloth dyed in rich indigo. Samurai, though belonging to a class above merchants, often observed this growing energy, aware that commerce quietly strengthened the world they were sworn to protect. Castles rose higher during this period, becoming centers not only of defense but of administration and culture. Picture the graceful lines of Himeji Castle, its white walls shining like a heron against the sky. Within such fortresses, daimyo governed vast territories. Samurai served as their advisors, guards, and messengers, walking through wooden corridors that echoed with the soft tap of sandals. These castles stood as symbols of both strength and stability, their architecture blending practicality with elegance. Technology advanced in ways that touched both war and peace. Swordsmiths perfected the forging of blades, each katana a masterpiece of folded steel, strong yet flexible. Blacksmiths produced tools that improved farming, while carpenters built bridges and boats that connected distant communities. Firearms, though foreign in origin, were adapted and incorporated into military strategy. Imagine rows of samurai, some still with bows, others with muskets, standing in formation beneath banners fluttering in the wind. It was a sight that revealed how tradition and innovation could walk side by side. Culturally, the samurai deepened their role as guardians of refinement. The tea ceremony became an essential part of their world. In a quiet room with tatami mats, a samurai would kneel as powdered green tea was prepared with slow, deliberate movements. Every gesture, pouring water, whisking the tea, serving the bowl, was a lesson in patience, humility, and respect. Poetry, painting, and calligraphy also flourished, turning samurai into men of both sword and brush. This period of growth also carried Japan into closer contact with the outside world. Dutch and Portuguese traders brought maps, books, and instruments that stirred curiosity. Telescopes revealed the stars in new ways, while globes suggested a world larger than most had imagined. Samurai scholars studied these items, seeking knowledge that might strengthen their society without erasing their traditions. Japan was cautious, but not closed. It was a land carefully choosing which seeds of foreign influence to plant in its own soil. Politically, the power of the shogunate grew stronger. Under leaders like Tokugawa Ieyasu, stability was achieved after centuries of conflict. The samurai now served within a tightly organized system, their loyalty ensuring peace across the islands. Imagine entire provinces where the sound of battle was replaced by the quiet rhythm of farming, trade, and ceremony. The samurai still trained, still carried their swords, but their purpose was now as much about maintaining order as about waging war. Through all of this, the samurai remained symbols of balance. They stood at the edge of tradition and change, guardians of an older way, yet participants in growth. Their presence reminded society that progress was safest when guided by discipline, humility, and loyalty. As night falls over this chapter, picture the glow of lanterns along castle walls, the hum of voices in busy markets, and the quiet concentration of a samurai writing poetry beneath the soft light of the moon. Japan was in a season of expansion, its people steady, its culture flowering, its warriors dignified. Yet, as history always reminds us, growth is never free from challenge. Beyond this flourishing lay the storms of crisis that would test the samurai Ieya's resolve and redefine their very existence. Growth, as steady as it may feel, always carries within it the seeds of change. For Japan and its samurai, the period of flourishing could not last forever. Beneath the order of castles, the rhythm of rice fields, and the elegance of ceremonies, tensions slowly gathered. This was the period of crisis when war, poverty, and instability began to test the very foundations of the samurai's way of life. Imagine Japan in the 17th century. At first glance, life seemed peaceful under the shogunate's rule. Castles stood strong, merchants traveled with their goods, and fields continued to yield their harvests. But behind this appearance of balance, many samurai began to feel the weight of uncertainty. Peace, while welcome, meant fewer battles to fight. Without war, the warrior's traditional role became less clear. Some samurai found themselves without masters, left adrift in a society that no longer had a place for their skills. These men became known as Ronin, the masterless samurai. The existence of Ronin revealed a deeper problem. Loyalty had always been the core of the samurai's identity, binding warrior to lord. But when lords lost power, fell from favor, or were defeated, their retainers were left with no one to serve. Imagine a samurai waking one morning to find his master's castle abandoned, his family scattered, his purpose dissolved. In that silence, the very meaning of his life was shaken. Economically, this was also a time of strain. Farmers bore heavy burdens through taxes and labor demands, while merchants gained wealth that sometimes surpassed the income of samurai. Yet, by the strict social order of the time, merchants were placed below warriors in status. This imbalance created quiet tensions, as samurai who had once stood proudly above all others now found themselves struggling to maintain their livelihoods. Some took small administrative roles, others sought work as guards or teachers, but many faced poverty. The sight of a Ronin wandering through a town was both familiar and unsettling. Without a master, he still carried his sword, but his place in society was uncertain. Some formed small bands seeking employment, while others lived solitary lives, offering their skills where they could. In the eyes of the people, a Ronin was both a reminder of past glory and a symbol of instability. The political world, too, was fragile. While the Tokugawa shogunate brought long stretches of peace, strict rules created tension among the daimyo. Travel was restricted, alliances carefully monitored, and every lord required to spend alternating years in the capital of Edo, leaving families behind as a form of control. Imagine the roads filled with long processions of retainers, banners fluttering as lords journeyed to and from the capital. Though it preserved stability, the system drained resources and created quiet discontent. Nature, as always, also played its role in crisis. Famines, floods, and harsh winters brought hardship to villages. When the rice harvest failed, hunger spread, and the burden was felt at every level of society. Samurai, bound by honor, shared in these difficulties, their lives tied as closely to the fields as those who worked them. Yet even in these challenges, the spirit of the samurai endured. Many Ronin sought to live with dignity despite their uncertain position. They studied philosophy, wrote poetry, and practiced martial arts, keeping alive the values of discipline and honor even without a master. The image of the Ronin, alone, wandering, carrying both pride and sorrow, became one of the most enduring symbols of Japan's history. This period of crisis was not only about hardship, it was also about transformation. Through struggle, new ideas took shape. Samurai began to reflect on the meaning of loyalty, on the balance between service and independence, and on the role of tradition in a changing world. These quiet reflections, born out of difficulty, prepared Japan for the shifts that would soon carry it into the age of modernization. As we close this chapter, imagine the image of a lone samurai walking along a narrow road at dusk. The fields are empty, the villages quiet, and his footsteps steady but unhurried. He is no longer tied to a master, yet he carries himself with the same dignity, his sword at his side, his spirit unbroken. This is the Ronin, born of crisis, destined to shape the next era of Japan's story. History often turns its pages quietly, but sometimes the sound is thunderous. For Japan, the 19th century was a time when the calm rhythm of tradition was suddenly interrupted by the powerful winds of change. The world beyond Japan's shores, once distant, came closer than ever before, and the samurai, symbols of honor and loyalty, found themselves standing at a crossroads between the past and the future. For centuries, Japan had lived under a policy of seclusion. Foreign ships were rarely allowed to enter, and contact with the outside world was limited. Yet the world was changing quickly. Western nations, driven by industry and expansion, sought new trade routes and new partners. In the year 1853, American warships arrived in Edo Bay under the command of Commodore Matthew Perry. Their black holes and powerful cannons were unlike anything Japan had seen before. The arrival of these ships signaled the end of isolation. The Tokugawa shogunate, Guardians of Japan's old order faced immense pressure. To refuse trade meant risking conflict with powerful foreign forces. To accept it meant opening the door to transformation. Agreements were made, and foreign goods, technologies, and ideas began to flow into Japan. For merchants and city dwellers, this was a time of opportunity. But for the samurai, it was a moment of deep uncertainty. The samurai had long been Japan's protectors, but with peace at home and the influence of foreign powers rising, their role began to diminish. Firearms and Western military techniques reduced the dominance of the sword. Governments introduced reforms, weakening the privileges that had once separated samurai from common people. Many warriors, proud of their heritage, felt as though the ground beneath them was shifting. The crisis deepened in the 1860s, when disputes over how Japan should face the modern world erupted into open conflict. Some samurai wished to expel the foreigners and preserve tradition. Others believed that adopting new technologies and ways of governance was the only way to survive. This divide created tensions, leading to uprisings and battles. In the year 1868, the Meiji Restoration transformed Japan completely. The shogunate was dissolved, and the emperor, long a distant figure, was restored to central authority. The new government embraced modernization with extraordinary speed. Railways were built, factories opened, Western-style schools established, and new laws written. Japan, once isolated, began to stand on the world stage. For the samurai, this was the most profound change of all. Their stipends were reduced and eventually abolished. Their swords, once the mark of their honor, were banned from public display. The class that had carried Japan's spirit for centuries was formally dissolved. Imagine the sorrow of a samurai, once proud to serve his lord, now told he was no longer different from a farmer or merchant. The loss was not only material, but deeply spiritual. Some samurai adapted, becoming teachers, scholars, soldiers in the new Western-style army, or leaders in politics and business. Their discipline, education, and sense of duty allowed them to contribute to Japan's modernization in new forms. Yet others resisted, refusing to abandon the sword and the traditions that defined their lives. The most famous of these struggles would later erupt into rebellion, where Ronin and loyal samurai alike fought for an ideal that was fading from the world. And yet, even in loss, the samurai spirit endured. The values of loyalty, discipline, and honor that had guided them were carried into modern Japan, shaping its identity and its path toward becoming a world power. As we leave this chapter, picture a samurai in the twilight of tradition, standing on the edge of a railway platform as the first steam train rushes past. The smoke and iron of the machine roar with the promise of a new age, but in the samurai's eyes, the reflection of the past still glows. His sword is by his side, but its place in the world has changed forever. By the late 19th century, Japan had transformed in ways that would have seemed unthinkable only a generation before. The samurai, as a distinct social class, had been dissolved, yet their spirit lingered, shaping Japan's place in the wider world. This episode explores not only the end of the samurai's way of life, but also how their values continued to ripple far beyond Japan's shores. The Meiji government, determined to secure Japan's survival in a world of empires, borrowed heavily from the West. Armies were reorganized, industries developed, and foreign advisors invited to teach modern sciences, medicine, and engineering. At first glance, it seemed as though the ancient samurai code had been set aside. Yet, if you looked more closely, you would see that the soul of the samurai had been woven into this new national fabric. The samurai's ideals of discipline, honor, and loyalty became part of the moral foundation for the modern Japanese military. Soldiers no longer carried swords, but the spirit of Bushido, the way of the warrior, was invoked as a guide to conduct. In schools, children were taught not only reading and mathematics, but also stories of heroic samurai who had sacrificed everything for duty. These lessons were meant to build a nation of citizens who placed honor above personal gain. As Japan grew stronger, it began to make its presence felt in the world. Victories in the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 and the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 shocked the great powers. For the first time, an Asian nation had defeated a European empire in modern warfare. Across the world, observers wrote with fascination about this remarkable transformation. Some saw Japan's success as the triumph of modernization. Others whispered that it was the enduring spirit of the samurai that had given the Japanese such resilience. Meanwhile, the image of the samurai traveled far beyond Japan. Writers, artists, and philosophers in Europe and America became captivated by tales of Ronin and their code of honor. Books about Bushido were translated into many languages, inspiring figures as diverse as politicians, poets, and even soldiers of other nations. The samurai came to symbolize an almost timeless ideal, the quiet strength of one who lives by principle, even in a changing world. But this admiration was not without complexity. As Japan continued to modernize, the same values that had once guided individual samurai were increasingly used to bind the entire nation together. Loyalty to a lord was replaced with loyalty to the emperor. The discipline of a warrior became the discipline of a citizen. In this way, the samurai spirit was preserved, yet reshaped, serving purposes far larger than the private vows of one man to his master. Still, the memory of the Ronin, wandering masterless in search of meaning, continued to hold a special place. Their stories were retold in theater, in books, and later in films. They became symbols not only of loyalty but also of independence, of the struggle between old ways and new horizons. To this day, the tale of the 47 Ronin is remembered as one of the great dramas of loyalty and sacrifice, a story that belongs not only to Japan but to the world. When we think of the samurai's role in history, we see more than warriors with swords. We see a bridge between tradition and modernity, between the East and the West. They remind us that even as nations change, certain values, discipline, honor, devotion, can endure, taking on new forms across time and space. So, picture Japan at the dawn of the 20th century. Steamships line the harbors, factories hum with new energy, and newspapers speak of Japan as a rising power. Yet, in the quiet of a household shrine, an old samurai's armor rests, polished but unused, a relic of another era. It is both an ending and a beginning. The world is changing, but the spirit of the samurai is still present, whispering softly in the rhythm of a nation that has stepped onto the world stage. History often feels like a river, flowing steadily, sometimes quiet, sometimes roaring, always moving forward. The story of the samurai and the Ronin is one such river. Though their era has passed, their presence continues to ripple across centuries, shaping not only Japan but also the wider world. This final chapter reflects on their legacy and imagines how their spirit may guide the future. Even today, the samurai live on in symbols and memory. Their armor, carefully preserved in museums, speaks of elegance and discipline. Their swords, once tools of battle, are now works of art, treasured for the craftsmanship and spirit they embody. Yet their most enduring gift is not made of steel or silk. It is the philosophy of Bushido, the way of the warrior. Bushido emphasized loyalty, honor, restraint, and devotion to a cause greater than oneself. These ideals shaped generations of Japanese citizens, long after the samurai class itself disappeared. In schools, in literature, and even in modern workplaces, echoes of Bushido can still be found. The notion of giving one's best effort, of valuing the collective over the individual, continues to influence Japanese society in subtle, profound ways. Beyond Japan, the samurai became a symbol of dignity in the face of change. In the 20th century, artists, writers, and filmmakers across the world retold their stories. Sometimes the samurai were portrayed as noble defenders, sometimes as tragic figures unable to adapt to modern times. Both images carry a truth. The samurai were both guardians of tradition and victims of transformation. The Ronin, too, have left their mark. Their wandering paths, their struggles to find meaning without masters, resonate even today. In a world where change is constant and certainty is rare, their stories remind us that the search for purpose is timeless. They are not merely figures of the past, they are mirrors for anyone who has ever felt unmoored, yet continued walking forward. In Japan, the spirit of the samurai found new expression in arts such as kendo and judo, where the discipline of the sword and the body became forms of self-cultivation rather than combat. In business and leadership, the samurai ethic inspired dedication, patience, and responsibility. And in popular culture, the samurai became icons, appearing in novels, films, and modern media, symbols of strength, restraint, and elegance. But perhaps the greatest legacy of the samurai is this: they remind us that values can survive even when institutions fade. The castles, the titles, the feudal lords, all have disappeared. Yet the quiet dignity of a samurai bow, the steady gaze of one who lives by principle, remains alive in memory. As we look toward the future, the samurai continue to inspire questions. How can honor exist in a world of constant change? How can loyalty be balanced with independence? How can tradition and modernity walk together? These questions are as relevant today as they were centuries ago. So, imagine the scene one last time. A quiet room, the light of dawn filtering through shoji screens. An ancestral sword rests on a stand, untouched but gleaming softly. Outside, the world hums with modern life, trains, cities, technology. But inside, the spirit of the past remains calm and steady. The samurai may no longer walk among us, yet their essence continues, like the gentle rhythm of a river that never stops flowing. This is the legacy of the samurai and of the Ronin, a reminder that even in the face of change, some ideals are eternal. They belong not just to Japan, but to all humanity. And so, our journey comes to a close. We have walked through distant centuries, from the rise of the samurai to the wandering of the Ronin, and finally to their legacy that still lingers today. The world they knew was different from ours, filled with castles, swords, and solemn vows, but the values they carried of honor, loyalty, and quiet strength continue to echo gently across time. As you return from this story to the present moment, let yourself notice the contrast. Outside, the world is modern, filled with comfort and familiarity. Yet within you, the calm rhythm of the past still lingers, like a soft afterglow. Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders relax. Know that the tales of history will always be here, waiting to guide you back into stillness whenever you need them. For now, you may close your eyes and let sleep take you, as gently as a river carries a leaf. The samurai's journey has ended, and yours drifts quietly into the realm of dreams. Good night.